Hi everyone, it's lovely to see you. I'm Lorna and we're reading The Boy at the Back of the Class by Anjali Q. Ralph, and this is chapter 22, Worldwide Whispers. Instead of going to work the next morning, Mum decided to walk to the bus stop with me. She said it was because me and Tom were famous now, and that even though we probably wouldn't be famous for more than a day, we needed to be careful. I just want to make sure you're not going to be chased by any reporters, she said, as she helped me put my coat on. Some of them are good people doing their job, but some of them have absolutely no scruples. I followed Mum out of the flat, wondering what scruples were, because Mum had looked angry when she had said the word, so I knew it was bad not to have any of them. I also wondered why reporters might chase us. Tintin, who has to be one of the best reporters in the world, only ever chased people who were kidnappers or thieves or had done something wrong. When we reached the bus stop, we found Tom's mum and dad there too. Mum went to talk to them and Tom and I huddled together. Tom said his parents had told him that if he ever ran away from school again, he would be so grounded that he would never see daylight again. But I told Mum it comes in through the curtains anyway, even when they're shut. And then, when we watched the news, she screamed and hugged me and said how brave I was, said Tom, scratching his head. I don't get it. I told him I didn't get it either, and about everything that had happened to me after I had gotten home too, all the neighbours coming over, and about horrible Mr. Greggs, and how Mum had been angry one moment and then happy the next moment, and how she had laughed at what Stan the taxi man had said. Oh yeah, Dad gave him a cheer too, Tom grinned. I've never seen him cheer for anything before, except when we dropped off my Nana at the airport after she'd been staying with us for a month. We heard footsteps and Josie and Michael came running up to meet us. We saw you on the news. Did you give them the note? What did they say? As soon as Josie and Michael finished asking their questions, Tom and me took it in turns to answer them. As we were talking, lots of people gathered round and asked me and Tom if we were the kids from the news. We were about to say yes when Tom's dad called us over. Now listen up, said Tom's dad, kneeling down. There are going to be a lot of people wanting to ask you all sorts of things about yesterday, and whilst you can tell Josie and Michael and Mrs. Sanders everything, and Mrs. Cann, I added. Yes, and Mrs. Cann, and Miss Hemsey, asked Josie. Okay, yes, her too, nodded Tom's dad, scratching his head in the exact same way Tom does when he's thinking. But if anyone else asks you what's happened, I want you to say exactly what grown-ups say when they're famous, and they've got to keep something a secret. Shall I tell you what it is? We all nodded and looked at each other excitedly. Famous grown-ups always say, no comment, when they want to keep something a secret, continued Tom's father. And that's what I want you to do. Let's all give it a practice right now. Tom, you go first. No comment, said Tom, thrusting his nose in the air. No comment, said Josie, grinning. No comment, said Michael seriously. No comment, I said loudly. Good, said Mum. Now if anyone asks you why you went to Buckingham Palace, or what the police said to you, or anything about yesterday, you say, no comment, we all shouted, making all the people at the bus stop look over at us. My mum and Tom's mum and Dad all smiled. Now, there's a promise we want you all to make too, said Mum. We want you all to promise us that you won't look at any newspapers today. We all looked at each other, frowning a little, but nodded. Promise? Asked Tom's mum. Not a single newspaper. We promise, we all said, although I could see Josie had her fingers crossed behind her back. Excellent, said Tom's dad, giving us all a thumbs up. Now, we've spoken to Mrs. Sanders this morning, said Tom's mum, and a teacher, probably Mrs. Sanders herself, will be meeting you at the gates to make sure you don't get hounded by the odd reporter or two. You'll be taken straight to her office because she needs to have a few words with all of you before lessons start. Oh no, cried out Michael. Are we all in trouble? Are my parents going to find out? It'll be fine, son, said Tom's dad, patting Michael on the back. I promise. Now go on, have a good day, said Mum, as our bus came to a loud hissing stop in front of us. And we'll see you tonight. You're all to come straight home, she shouted. We all nodded and waved and ran up to the top deck as usual. The other passengers looked at me and Tom with a frown, before looking at their newspapers and then looking back at us again. We hurried past and sat together in a little huddle. In whispers, Josie and Michael told us about their day yesterday. It had been exciting too. Josie said she'd had to make up a story involving a Chinese takeaway and endless buckets of puke to get Mrs. Cann to believe I was sick but would be back the next day. And Michael had pretended to lose his voice so that he didn't have to say anything to Mrs. Cann when she asked him where Tom was. But of course he had kept forgetting that he was meant to have lost his voice, so Josie had to kick him lots of times to make him remember. And then, when the police had rung to tell Mrs. Sanders what had happened, she had come and taken both of them out of class and made them tell her everything. Did Mrs. Sanders say anything about giving us detention? Asked Tom. Josie and Michael shook their heads. But Mrs. Cann seemed upset, said Josie, looking down. I feel bad for lying to her. Me too, said Michael. Maybe we should make her a card, said Josie. Yeah, and I've still got some of the Queen's biscuits left over. We can give her those for her tea, said Tom. But when we got to school, we forgot all about Mrs. Cann, because the school was surrounded by hundreds of vans with large round satellite dishes on their roofs, and lights and microphones and fluffy grey things on sticks. Staring at us were hundreds of cameras on legs, which looked like one-eyed insects that could zoom their eyes in and out and swivel their heads in any direction they wanted. And all of them had lots of people bobbing up and down behind them. As we walked towards the gates, a woman suddenly cried out, "There they are!" and started running towards us. I could see Mr. Irons standing by the railings and looking at us, his eyes narrowed and his nose high in the air. His moustache was twitching. "No comment," shouted Michael as he began running towards the school gates. We all ran too, but before we could reach them, lots of cameras and arms and legs had surrounded us and were blocking our way. What message were you trying to send our government? Was this an act of protest on behalf of child refugees around the world? What was in the note? Who put you up to this? Where are you from? Were you born in this country? Would you like to tell us your story? Everywhere we looked, there were lenses and lights and loud clicking sounds. I clung on to Josie and Michael and Tom as the one-eyed machines all pushed us into a circle. I could hear Josie's breathing beginning to wheeze. She doesn't like tight spaces, and my hands were beginning to sweat. Michael and me shouted, "No comment," but I don't think anyone could hear us. "Everybody stand back right now," came a cry. And just as suddenly as the scary cameras and reporters and microphones had surrounded us, they all instantly moved away and we could breathe again. "No shame at all," shouted the same familiar voice, which was getting closer and closer. "How dare you harass my kids?" We saw Mrs. Sanders pushing past the cameras like a red-faced bull and reaching out her hand to us. "Stay off school property, and if I see anyone near these kids again, I'll be calling the police and the Queen's Guards." Grabbing my hand, Mrs. Sanders stormed back in through the school gates, pulling us like the trailing tail of a kite behind her. She stopped briefly in front of Mr. Irons, who was now standing by the school doors. "Mr. Irons, you were specifically instructed to wait and bring these children in safely. Where were you?" Mr. Irons gave us all a cold stare, his nose deadly quiet. "I'm afraid I didn't see them," he said, his eyes narrowing even more and his moustache getting twitchier. "You didn't see them? Stay here. I will speak to you later." Throwing open the school doors, Mrs. Sanders led us in and stopped to look down at us properly. She was angrier than I had ever seen her, and her whole face was the colour of an extra bright pink peach. "Are you all okay?" she said. Her voice was back to a normal volume, but it was shaky. We all nodded, too stunned to say anything. "Anyone hurt?" We shook our heads. "Good. Now all of you are to go straight upstairs to my office," she ordered, looking over her glasses at us. "You'll find Mrs. Cann already there, along with Amit and his foster mum and Miss Hemsey and 2 police officers who want to have a quick word. I'll be up in just a minute. I need a word with Mr. Irons." And waving us along, she hurried back outside. I think there are 2 types of being scared in the world. The first type is when you do something wrong, like breaking your mum's favourite vase by accident, and you're scared of her finding out, but at the same time, because she's your mum, you know that deep down she won't ever punish you too horribly, because she knows that accidents happen. But then, there's another type of scared. It's when something you never ever thought would happen, suddenly does. And the idea of it is so awful that you want to run away. I've only ever felt this type of scared once before, and that was when I saw Mum standing in the hospital corridor crying, and I knew right away that something bad had happened to my dad. I was feeling that second type of scared again now, and it made me want to be sick all over the floor. I had never thought that the greatest idea in the world would get us into trouble with the police, and I never ever imagined it would get Amit into trouble too. I didn't want him to feel angry at us. But what if he hated us for not telling him our plan, and for the news people knowing about him, even though we hadn't meant them to? "Come on," said Josie, putting an arm over my shoulder. And together we all walked in silence up to Mrs. Sanders' office. I took a deep breath and, fearing the worst, opened the door. But instead of angry stares and shaking heads, we found everyone smiling at us. Mrs. Can ran up and gave us all a hug, and so did Miss Hemsey, and Amit looked at us with his wide lion eyes and gave us a small wave. His foster mum was holding her hands to her lips as if she was praying and kept saying, "You dear children." And there were 2 police officers standing next to the door, but they didn't look angry either and just nodded and smiled at us. "Come and sit down," said Mrs. Can, leading us to 4 chairs that had been squeezed in front of Mrs. Sanders' desk. We all sat down. I was still feeling jumpy inside, but at least I wasn't feeling sick anymore. "As soon as Mrs. Sanders gets back, we want to hear all about what happened yesterday," said Mrs. Can. "Miss Hemsey will translate everything for Amit, and we want you to take your time, because it's all very important." "But miss, what about first period?" whispered Michael, showing her his watch as it started flashing a blue colour. Just as he held it up, the bell for registration began to ring. Mrs. Can smiled. "Don't worry, Miss Stevens is taking the class this morning." We immediately felt sorry for everyone in the class. Miss Stevens is learning to be a teacher, but she's so boring and always spends so much time writing on the board that everyone hopes she won't really ever become one. Mrs. Sanders came in and, squeezing past everyone, sat down in her big chair that had a squashed green velvet pillow on it. "Right," she said, clapping her hands once. "Begin." Slowly at first, and then getting faster and faster and faster, we began to talk. We talked about how we became friends with Amit and how we wanted to help after finding out about where his mum and dad might be. We talked about hearing that the border gates were going to be shut and about all the plans we had come up with to help. I could see Miss Hemsey explaining everything to Amit as we went, and his eyes getting wider and wider. But it wasn't until I got out my exercise book and showed everyone the greatest idea in the world and the emergency plan that he jumped up from his seat and came to stand next to me. Miss Hemsey had to stand up too, as we continued to talk about the letter to the Queen and the presents we were meant to give her, and Stan the taximan and Devinder the paramedic, and the extra special Coldstream Guard who had given us their word. Nobody asked us any questions, not even one. They all just sat and listened and nodded as Miss Hemsey murmured what we were saying in Amit's ear. It was strange having so many grown-ups sit and listen as if we were them and they were us, but it felt good too. When we had said everything there was to say, Mrs. Sanders nodded and put her hands together. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I hardly know what to say." She leaned forward and picked up my exercise book with the greatest idea in the world drawn in it. "But what I can say is that Amit is very, very lucky to have friends who are so passionate about helping him find his family." Mrs. Can nodded, and I saw the 2 police officers nodding too. "Now, just to be clear," said Mrs. Sanders, peering over her glasses at us, "what you did was extremely dangerous, and your plan, or the likes of it, must never ever be attempted again. Do you understand?" We all nodded silently. I could feel my cheeks getting hot, and saw Tom's ears instantly turn bright red. "You lied to Mrs. Can. You left school without permission, and you put yourselves in great danger. Behaviour like this would usually lead to a temporary suspension from school." Josie gasped, and Michael winced. I could hear Tom swallowing nervously, and even Amit looked scared. Mrs. Sanders went on. "However, we've spoken with all your parents, and I can understand fully that you thought this was an emergency. So," I looked up at Mrs. Sanders and could feel everyone doing the same. "In this instance, you will not be suspended." Tom yelped a small "yes," and Josie let out a huge puff of air that had been making her cheeks swell, and Michael gave a long sigh. And as soon as Miss Hemsey had told him what had happened, Amit cheered and clapped. But even though I felt happy too, I couldn't feel fully happy because I still wanted to know something. "And what about Amit's family, miss? Has the Queen found them already?" Mrs. Sanders shook her head and slowly leaned forward. "I think you should all know that the Queen, well, there are some things that even she can't do." "But she's the Queen," frowned Tom. "She can do whatever she wants." I could see Amit staring at Mrs. Sanders as if she wasn't making any sense to him either. But Mrs. Sanders was shaking her head. "I'm afraid that's not quite true. I'm sure that the Queen would like to try and help Amit in some way, but I doubt very much that she'll be allowed to send out extra people to find his family, especially when no one knows where they are." On hearing Mrs. Sanders' words, I felt something hard hit me in the middle of my chest. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that the Queen could help anyone if she really wanted to, but even though my mouth opened, it couldn't say any words. I know that may come as a huge disappointment, said Mrs. Sanders, peering over her glasses at us and looking at me the longest. But Amit has lots of people trying to help him find his parents, though even if they do find them, it may take a long time, months, maybe even years before they can join him here. That's why he's staying with Miss York for now, she added, nodding at Amit's foster mum. We all stayed silent, and even though I didn't want them to, I could feel my eyes beginning to get wet and my nose tickling and something heavy sinking in the pit of my stomach. Everything we had done had been for nothing, and the greatest idea in the world was really the stupidest idea in the world. In fact, it was probably the stupidest idea in the whole universe, and I knew that everyone was thinking it too. Now, said Mrs. Sanders kindly, I want to show you something. She took a newspaper from out of her bag and laid it on the desk in front of us. I looked over at Michael and Tom and Josie, but I think they must all have forgotten about the promise we made because they immediately started to read the paper. So I wiped my eyes and looked at it too. I knew that it had to be okay to break a promise to your mum if your head teacher was telling you to. A huge headline stared up at us from the front page, and alongside it was a large blurry image of me running up to one of the Queen's guards with Tom behind me. I could tell it was me because of my bright blue rucksack, but I couldn't see my face properly at all. The paper looked like this. London News. The story said that the newspaper was going to run an international appeal to find Amit's parents, which made Josie grin and whisper, "See? This is what it said." Yesterday afternoon saw a centuries-old tradition in disarray when the changing of the guard ceremony was disrupted by two 9-year-old children. Breaking through the barriers, they attempted to give one of Her Majesty's Palace guards a written note, asking the Queen to help them find the family of a refugee boy known only as Amit. The decisive actions of these children have served to remind us all of the shameful hesitancy and fear which often govern our actions and those of our government. So who is Amit and where is his family? This paper is determined to help and urges our readers, our leaders and our politicians to do what they can to not only find this young boy's missing family, but to reunite them here on UK soil. Perhaps it is the actions of these children which will inspire political bodies across the world to finally heed the plight of refugee children everywhere. A fitting testament indeed to a young boy whose story we have yet to learn, made infamous by a daring act of true friendship. We appeal to all of you to not let the brave actions of these children be in vain. Help us find Amit's family. After she had finished, Mrs. Cann put the paper down and looked at us with eyebrows raised. "So you see," she said, clasping her hands together and placing them under her chin, "all is not lost. Even if the Queen can't do as much as she'd like, there is a whole world of people who are whispering Amit's name and trying to think of how to help instead." Later that morning, as I sat in lessons, I thought about what Mrs. Sanders had said. I thought about the worldwide whispers being whispered right at that very moment and wondered how long it would take for all of them to reach the border gate people and Amit's mum and dad too. I had never thought about how loud a whisper can be if there are lots and lots of them. So all that day, I whispered, "Help Amit," out loud too, whenever I could. So did Tom and Michael and Josie, and whenever we did it together, our whispers made us sound like an ocean. Join me for chapter 23.